This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willie Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. How are you? How was your week? I'm doing great. Been working in the studio all week on some brand new music with some awesome up-and-coming producers that you'll hear about, I'm sure, in the months to come. We're making some really fun stuff. And speaking of fun, my guest today is Valerie Lee from Mixmag. And I had the most fun doing this interview. It was a treat to talk to her. It was cool for a lot of different reasons. She's the first journalist I've ever had on the show, and that's something I've been wanting to do for a while. I'm really happy that it was her to be the first one, because I'm a huge fan of what she does. She's the global culture editor over at Mixmag, which is a big deal, but she's involved in a lot of different projects. She does the On Rotation podcast for Mixmag, which is, if you like this podcast, you should definitely go check out On Rotation. She's fantastic on there. And many of you might be familiar if you were one of the, 90 trillion people who watched the Coachella live stream last year. She was one of the hosts of that. I guarantee you saw her there. She was running around talking to everybody. She's a fantastic writer. And it was just a treat to talk to somebody else who clearly just loves talking about, thinking about, being passionate about electronic music. It was great. You're going to love it. We're going to get into that in just a second. Before we do, this show has gotten a lot of new listeners in the last couple months, which is fantastic. And I've been hearing from a lot of people, talking to a lot of people, and I get asked, what's the best way I can get involved? What's the best way I can support this show? And I really cannot say it enough. The best way that you can support this show, that you can support me, that you can help us grow, it's really just word of mouth. That is how we get bigger. That is how we get more resources to talk to more people, better guests, everyone you want to hear from. All of that just comes from the strength of this community, from all of you guys listening out there. So if you have a friend who just loves music the way that you do, who would really appreciate something like this, just put them onto it. Let them know. If there's a particular episode you're feeling, you can make a post about us. Even just retweeting something that I put up there, all of that is the key to making this show run. I love seeing all the support out there, and I've been putting in a lot of work this year to make sure that I'm giving everyone out there the best product I can. I have a lot of ideas for where this show is going to go and how we can grow, more people to talk to, all of that. But it all starts with you guys, and I appreciate everyone out there. Another thing that I do every week is I update the Back to Bangers Spotify playlist. That is a playlist that you can go to every single week to find music from my guests, myself, music that we talk about on the show, and just a lot of other related goodies, just stuff I find that I think everyone out there would like. Things that sort of fit in the context of these conversations. The link to that is in the description of this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the show, and don't forget you can always reach out to me at any time you want. backtobackpod@gmail.com is the email address, or you can hit me up at Willie Joy or at backtobackpod on all social media. All right, so for this conversation with Valerie Lee, she's somebody that I had kind of had bouncing around in my head for a long time of talking to. And I was reminded of it recently because Justin Beretta from the Glitch Mob was talking about Valerie and how awesome she is. And it just sort of, relit that flame under my ass. I was up in LA, and like I said before, she was just a pleasure to talk to. I'm always looking at ways to expand the focus of this show. Talking to somebody on the media side, the journalism side, was fascinating for me because I get trapped kind of in the artist side of it a lot of the times. And it was really interesting and actually pretty inspiring to get the perspective of how a different side of the business operates. And Valerie's story is pretty amazing. I think she's kind of bridging the worlds of old media and new media, bringing a lot to the table. You can tell just from hearing her talk, she's got a million ideas. Her love of the whole culture, I think, really just shines through. And when you're done here, definitely make sure to go check out her On Rotation podcast that she does for Mixmag. It's a fantastic podcast. It's her and another host talking about dance music, interviewing artists, playing some music. She also just launched a series with Mixmag called Magnified, which is a 10-part series looking at some up-and-coming artists that she and her team thinks are really exciting right now. I'm going to link to Mixmag and where you can find all of her work in the description of this episode. So definitely go check that out when you're done here. For the time being, I just want to jump into this conversation because it's just so good. We went all over the map, her whole story, how she got to where she is, crazy travel, Coachella, Snoop Dogg's weed website. There is no stone left unturned here. That's all I'm going to say. It's fantastic. I hope you enjoy it. So check it out. This is me and Valerie Lee back to back. Let's go. So this is interesting. I mean, it's worth saying you're the first journalist, first person from the media who I've talked to on this show.
I'm honored.
No, I'm honored to have you here. I've been following your work, and actually shout out to Justin from Glitch Mob.
Beretta.
Yeah, he, I think when their last album came out, you and I had both done stuff with them kind of around that. And that's when I reconnected with those guys. I'd known them for a while, but not as well as I know them now. And they were talking about, and Justin particularly talking about the work he had done with you and how much he liked it. And he was telling me, putting the bug in my ear.
Those guys are the greatest dudes.
They're the best.
Ever. Yeah.
They really are the best. And I mean, we don't have to go too far in the Glitch Mob, but what I love about them is that they sort of occupy this unique space in dance music. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't really know. I think I even asked them this on their podcast episode. It was like, who is your competition? Or like, who do you even play shows with? Like, there's just no one else like them.
I mean, once you start thinking about the fact that they built their own instrument, you're kind of like, okay, well, there is no one else like you doing rock, electronic, crazy live stuff. So.
Yeah, and they make almost this cinematic soundtrack music, but is still performed live at festivals. I don't know. It's one of those things that doesn't make sense on paper.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's fun. It's fun to realize also how long they've been doing it. That was always the one thing, because I became friends with Beretta after, actually I was like covering them just as a fan when I was at Dancing Astronaut, and we kind of were friends on the internet and decided to meet in real life. And once I realized, I was like, oh my God, you guys have been doing this for like 10 years. Like, I was a child when you guys were first doing this, and yet they're still so grounded and still like breaking the mold and doing new things. It's just crazy. Yeah,
and still excited and having fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's another thing too. And it's something I want to ask you about what you do as well is, it's sort of how do you maintain the excitement and the engagement, as any of us professionals in the music industry, right?
Yeah.
We all get into this because we love music. But then comes that point, that inevitable point where your passion becomes your job.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I've seen a million times, especially with older artists, they're putting in the work, but the spark is kind of gone. And I have to imagine for journalism, it's probably the same thing, right? Like, if you start off excited to write about this culture and this music, and then
it's I think here's the thing. I think with media, I'm in a really lucky position where I don't necessarily have to do a lot of things that I'm not super excited about. And I think the reason why that is because it translates, right? It's like, if I go to a show to see an artist that I'm just really not interested in, I'm not going to write something great about it. I'm not going to have any good things to say about it. Not because, it's just not my taste.
Right.
And I've talked about this a lot before, when people, especially artists, ask for advice about like how to get their music covered by a certain journalist or a platform. I'm always like, just find the kids that are actually excited about what you're making. Like, find the base head on the staff of journalists at that blog that you want to get on, and they'll probably be really excited about it. So that's been a blessing in my job. And I've been able to I think I was given like a really early glimpse of things that felt really far out of my realm.
What do you mean?
Growing up, I think as a kid when EDM was the big thing here in the US, I'm so far away from, growing up in London where they're surrounded by electronic music everywhere they go. Like their parents were listening to it.
It's on the radio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, it has like a different level of respect out there. And same thing, like I didn't grow up in Chicago. I don't know the deep history of house, or I didn't know that. So I've been able to work with a lot of people who saw the value in kind of teaching someone like me about all that stuff. And that's helped me realize that, whatever you're excited about right now is so small in comparison to like the wider genre, history, all of it. And it's exciting to take it step by step in that way. Like you can get excited about every little thing, but then also remember that like whatever you're working on right now isn't like the only thing that's out there. There's so much out there to like discover.
That's a great perspective to have.
Yeah.
For anyone. I think you're absolutely right. For people working in the industry, for listeners, for fans, any of it. Because you see that evolution with listeners too, right? And just people who like the music is they'll get into it for one specific thing. And then the people who stick around, the ones who aren't just the tourists, their tastes evolve and change.
Totally.
And,
There's so much to discover. And I think that's a funny thing that, our genre, let's just say electronic music as one wide genre, we're such a weird genre in that I feel like we're so harsh on ourselves. Like we're always quick to be like, oh, we're like too niche. Like we're really small. Like people don't really care about us. But if you think about it, like house music has been there from the very beginning. People always come back to it, in hip hop, like whatever genre, you can kind of find your way back.
Right.
And then also between genres, sorry,
I love this stuff.
my dog's hanging out, trying to get some attention. But also even between genres, like we're so nitpicky with each other. Like it's hard for a person who loves techno to respect somebody who likes dubstep, even though there's plenty value in both and all.
Well, this is something I talk about a lot and think about a lot is this idea of lowbrow versus highbrow culture in what we do. And I think, say techno versus dubstep is maybe a great example of that because, techno has this stereotype, sometimes deservedly, of, that's where the pretentious snobs are.
Totally, yeah.
And, that's like the most evolved. Like if you had that brain meme where it's like regular brain, shiny brain, exploding brain, like the techno is the exploding brain.
It's the highest evolved Pokemon. Technomon.
Technomon. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's
all black.
It's right after Digimon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But, and so it has that reputation, whereas dubstep is, dirty, grimy, whatever, Neanderthal music.
Oh my God. Caveman music. No.
Yeah, and again, these are just the stereotypes. I love both. But it's interesting to me because the way I got into dance music and kind of my mentality still is the lowbrow stuff. Like I was a metalhead as a kid, which is another scene where you take a lot of pride in like, this is my thing and fuck everything else. And and then I started with hardcore and happy hardcore and like gabber and that kind of stuff. And this is a long time ago. But that's still like, it's still in me. It's still in my heart. And I still love stupid, simple banger music. Like I love it. But I also love the more, cerebral, whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting to me. Here's the whole point I was trying to make 10 minutes ago.
Tell me about the history of your genre loves.
I'll stop now. But the whole point is that I think there's this weird thing where the highbrow culture looks down on the lowbrow culture, right? Mm-hmm. But the lowbrow culture to me is oftentimes more accepting. Like I know a lot of people who like this sort of quote unquote uncultured, the simple music, the bangers, who love deep techno and weird ambient music and all that. But I don't see the reverse so much. And I want to bring it back to what you do and journalism in general too, because I've always felt like for certain journalistic outlets, if you don't have that kind of cultural perception behind you, it can be easy to feel like you're just counted out.
Yeah.
And I think probably that's a hard line to walk, right? As far as what do you shed light on? What do you want to talk about? Where is there actual culture worth reporting on, right?
Yeah.
And is that something you've encountered journalistically?
Yeah.
That culture war?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I think in general, the whole genre war. Here's the thing. So for me, from my experience, again, kind of going back to what I was saying about how I was given the opportunity to kind of be like the outlier in a lot of rooms really early on in my career, which I think helped me realize that there's value on both ends, right? Because like I started loving like Afrojack and I was like front row at EDC, like really partying it out.
Yeah.
And then and there's something to be said about artists like that, or, you know, if we're saying lowbrow, like the dubstep, which isn't always lowbrow, but, you know, well, let's just say that for now.
I mean, even the Dutch house stuff, that gave way to the big room house stuff, which is one of the most mocked genres, I feel like now.
100%.
Yeah.
So if we say like, okay, lowbrow, why do people look down on it? Why do like techno snobs or house snobs look down upon all that stuff? My own thing was always like, okay, for each person, there's a different purpose or something that you're taking from the music. And I think that's just kind of the general divide. What it always comes down to is like when you go to a dubstep show, I think 90%, maybe even higher, you're going because you are trying to like release an emotion and just like have a really great time and like have this experience that comes with dubstep.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case for a lot of people who go to, for example, a quote unquote highbrow show. If you're going to see someone who has like this really intricate live setup, or if you're going to go experience a techno show in this venue that has like all this crazy history.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of a difference of like, why are we attending these shows and what are we hoping to get out of it?
Sure.
So I think that's where the divide is, right? Because it boils down to the very simple, like, oh, you just don't understand like what I want from this, which is why people get so angry about it, being like, no, I'm like, my genre is the best. Because like, yeah, if you're trying to just like headbang and just like feel like you're getting this like release of like physical and emotion and all this stuff, then yeah, probably you should go to a dubstep show, because I don't think you'll get that from like this like beautiful like Nico Jar show. Like you're not going to get that kind of release, I don't think. But if you're trying to just like appreciate like history and like go on this 6-hour journey with an artist, like that's completely different. So,
and I mean, I guess that's sort of the beauty of the scene we're in, right? Is that you can have both of those experiences and it's available to you. And maybe at a certain point you want the one thing, and then a couple of years later you might want the other thing.
Yeah, and that's also the other side of it, at least for me, because I went through that evolution of like I came into the scene because it was popular. You know, I didn't grow up in a household that even really had a strong like music identity. Like my parents loved music in their own way, but I had the freedom to kind of uncover what my own musical taste was, and grew up at a time when people were going to raves and EDM was cool. So I got in that way, and then did my research because I really loved what I was finding, and then it ended up being like, okay, like now I listen to all this kind of music that definitely wasn't the stuff that was at the top when I first got into it. So
where did you grow up?
I grew up in a place called Davis up in Northern California.
Oh, yeah.
It's like UC Davis,
right.
You know it that way. But it's a pretty small town. Besides being a university town, it's quite like a small, cute, safe town.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did your folks do? Why were they in Davis?
So my mom is a professor. She teaches at Sac State up there, which is why we're there. And my parents are divorced, so my dad lives in China, so he's off elsewhere. But that's why we were in Davis. And yeah, I think what I was saying earlier about my parents not really having, you know, like you hear about people who their parents grew up listening to Tom Petty and the Beatles, and like that's what they love. Like I didn't really have that experience. And I think a lot of kids of immigrant families probably have a very similar experience, because you're just coming from families that have different cultures and different things that they grow up with. So I definitely wasn't like a musical kid.
Was there music in the house at all, or?
There was. I mean, I'll put it this way, like my mom was definitely like, she loves a good like soulful singer.
Sure.
Which I think actually, I thought about this the other day. I think it comes from just like her loving like traditional Chinese music, which is a lot of like opera style singing.
Right.
Because she loves like the Celine Dion's and the Adeles of the world.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that's her stuff. She's like emotional and I'm like, I'm here
I
for
mean,
it.
she's not alone in that.
Yeah, exactly. And then my dad was like kind of into some more like traditional like American or Western music, but it really like that was kind of like the limit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of just left to your own influences.
Yeah,
whatever
like I learned how to play instruments, and it was always like a lot of like like piano and flute and stuff like that, stereotypical Asian instruments. But yeah, I just didn't really like music wasn't really even a big thing that I was like, oh, I'm passionate about
Sure.
this.
You weren't like a big fan as a kid.
Yeah. Until I think maybe when I got to college, I think that's like really when it started happening for me because I went to UC Santa Cruz first. And anybody who knows anything about the Bay Area knows that the Bay Area's music scene is just one of a kind.
Yeah. Passion is a definite keyword there.
Yeah. And it's just unlike anything, even like having traveled all around the world at this point, nothing is like the Bay Area's music scene. There's like Bay Area hip hop, which like I didn't grow up there. I was born in Vallejo, so I'll put that out there.
There you go.
So I do have like Bay Area
You got
roots.
some cred.
Yeah, me and Mac Dre, we're the same, But yeah, so like there's Bay Area hip hop, which is like just so unique and like so much history to learn from that. And then moving to Santa Cruz, I became familiar with this really crazy fascination with electronic music, but not only electronic music, it was like a very specific stroke of like bass music, which is just really exciting when like you're in college and someone's like, hey, like someone's having this rave in the middle of the forest, like you want to go find it? And I was like, I guess.
So wait, when you say like a specific strain of bass music, what are we talking about and like what era is this?
I mean, I think it's called like West Coast bass. It's
Okay.
like, like the Bass Nectar is probably like the Bass Nectar. Bass Nectar is probably like the number one kind of example of what it was
Sure.
like.
But I know what you're talking about. Guys like Minnesota.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like all those guys. So that was just really, it was so different than anything I was listening to. Because I remember I would go to the Catalyst, which is a really famous venue
Love
in
the
Santa Cruz.
Catalyst.
Yeah, and I'd be going for like hip hop shows coming from like, oh, I like Bay Area, like I love the Pack and stuff. So I'd go see hip hop shows, and then they'd also have like dance music people. And saw Bass Nectar, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but this is really interesting. Like, this is crazy. So that's like kind of where it first started, an interest in like what was going on.
What about an interest in journalism and in writing? Were you writing as a kid?
Yeah.
Were you reading a lot as a kid? Like, where does that side come from?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely, like I was saying, as a kid, I wasn't like the music kid. I was definitely like the writer kid. I was writing like fiction, like chapter books and stuff when I was a little
Really?
kid. Yeah, like just
That's
they were
amazing.
like I can remember one was about like a dragon and like a princess. It was very silly, but it was really fun.
Yeah.
And then that translated into like I got into poetry for a little bit, and I think there was even a portion of my life where I was like writing songs, and I've never revisited them. So it'd be really funny to like see what I wrote.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. And then that definitely came to life a little bit more once I got to college, because I was one of those kids who went to college knowing that I should go to college, but not really knowing what I wanted to do
Same.
there.
Totally.
Yeah. And thankfully I had parents who were like, that's okay, but like we really just want you to be there and like figure it out, which is a really supportive and helpful way to look at it. So once I got there, I just started blogging like for fun, and it wasn't like I had my own blog platform. It was definitely like I was on Tumblr
Sure.
writing like almost diary style entries, which quickly started leaning towards like I was writing about music stuff that I was experiencing.
Right. And was this in the blog explosion of like the late 2000s?
Yeah, it must have
Mid
been,
to
because I
late?
graduated high school in 2010.
Okay.
So it was around that era.
Yeah.
I obviously didn't know that was happening at the time,
Of
but I was
course.
writing my own blog and did that for 2 years while I was in Santa Cruz. And I actually ended up transferring down to USC here in LA.
What brought that about?
I think it was the whole thing where I went to school being like, I just want to go to school, and then realized pretty quickly that I was like, okay, I like school, and now I know what I want to study. And USC has a really great like communications and media department. And
is that your degree?
yeah, I
Nice.
studied communications. So I somehow managed to get into USC, which was a total reach, but I did it. So you could do it too. And
I mean, come on, you must have been decent in school if you're writing, stories at whatever as a kid.
I was good. I think for me, it was kind of one of those things where like college was definitely better than high school, and that I realized like, oh, I like learning about things that I care about.
Sure.
But I definitely was never like the typical Asian stereotype of like always getting A's and like just always doing the best, which
Yeah.
like thankfully my parents were like not crazy in that way. And they were like, it's okay. Like as long as you're doing well.
Right.
I realized that I really wanted to get a degree in something around communications or media, and it worked out. And definitely coming to LA was a blessing in disguise that I didn't realize was like part of the package of getting into USC. I was really excited about, but being in LA really helped me like take the next leap into being like, okay, I'm really interested in this writing about music thing. What can I do with that? So
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So when you were in college and kind of in that transition point, it was the second year that you moved to LA?
third year, yeah.
Third year? Yeah. And at that point, did you have any kind of a vision for where you wanted it to go?
No, definitely not. Because I remember I got to USC and I really wanted to dive straight into kind of like the internships and like figuring out what was going on. And I guess I might have had some sort of inkling that I was interested in music because I did end up at a music marketing company in Hollywood and was doing really basic stuff like, like learning what a press release was and like learning how to make a mailer campaign, and realized that wasn't for me. I didn't like that part of it, but I did really like being involved in the music side. So that quickly turned into me looking for a place to like I was still blogging throughout this whole time.
Right.
And blogging to no one, which I think is really important because I still did it even though it was like my 5 friends who didn't care about music were reading it. They were like, okay, yeah, keep going.
Good job.
Yeah. So I wrote a lot about that. And now I look back on the stuff that I wrote, and it was definitely, I didn't realize it was like journalism at the time because I was writing like, opinion pieces and like features on like crucial things that were happening in the scene that I was
so sort
noticing.
of unconsciously you were writing things that could be categorized as like official pieces now, right?
And I just really liked doing that, just observing the culture around dance music.
And at the same time, had your interest in dance music, I assume that was sort of growing alongside.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely helped to be in LA where all of a sudden I could go to these huge festivals that always seemed really far away. Because
Right.
like, I think at that point I'd maybe been to Outside Lands like once or something and seen like, oh, this is what like a big music festival's like. But then you got to LA and like Hard was happening, like all the Insomniac events were happening like every single weekend. So I got to quickly get involved in that. So that translated to me being like, all right, I really like this. I want to do this a little bit more seriously. And I was looking for someone who could teach me more about, even just the technicalities of writing. Because I was in like college, but not really getting that exactly what I wanted from it. So I ended up putting in an application for Dancing Astronaut. It was just a cold call. They were like, we're looking for more writers. And joined them.
And this was probably around the peak of their powers, right?
Yeah. It was like high time for blogs at that point.
Yeah.
And definitely. I actually have like never thought about that, but you're so right. Like I joined right when the like blog life was
When
strong.
blog life was good. Yeah.
Yeah, when blog life was real good.
Blog life's not so good.
Yeah. So that was basically like unlocking the key to like the city of like, you get to go to all these shows now and you get to like meet all these people. And it was great because blogging is really great to do like while you're in college. You can like manage just like here and there, like go to class and then write about your things that you really like. And,
It
like, go to
fits
the
into your
shows.
lifestyle, right?
Yeah. So that was what I did all throughout college. And I loved it. Yeah, it was great.
And so was there any kind of theme you were known for, anything specifically they hired you to do? Or was it kind of like a mix of different pieces?
Yeah, it definitely, at first, I just got brought on just to be like a pleb, basically. Like I was writing the news and just getting it out there. But I think pretty quickly, I kind of fell back into the same trend that I was doing before of, I was like culture observing, like doing more of like opinions of like, why is this happening? Like what is instigating this? Or like, where is this going? I remember one of my favorite pieces that I did with DA was talking about the laws in the US that are related to drugs and how that relates to dance music culture specifically. And I think a lot of people know about it at this time, like the Rave Act. It was called the Rave Act at a point, which is kind of wild. And just unpacking that history. And that was like the very first taste, I think, that I got of realizing that it goes a lot deeper than what you think it is. It goes all the way back to what is like the 90s or even before that, when they were like trying to crack down on
definitely
crack.
In the 90s. Yeah.
Like literally then, and like that law got so just folded into what's happening now. And that's a big reason why we went through that phase of all these kids were dying, and it seemed as though no one could do anything about it, even though the media was talking about it nonstop. And there's like all these laws that prevent people who want to do something to prevent it from actually taking those actions.
Well, sure. And that's always the stereotype, right? Is that dance music is drug music.
Yeah.
And that, everyone there is on drugs, and that's what you do if you go there. And for me, it's always been bizarre just because like I've never been a drug person really.
Yeah.
Like even as a kid.
Aren't, yeah.
No, yeah. Like I was just like a lame nerd as a kid and I liked this weird music, and like for me that's all it was. And in some ways still is. But yeah, it was always interesting to me because that's such a strong stigma. But I don't know, maybe because I'm sure you've looked into this way more than I have. I mean, statistically, like numbers wise, is it that much worse than any other music subculture?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is when I started doing this research and getting really interested in this subject, is you realize that it's just everywhere. It's not just dance music. Like, just think about the 70s when people were listening to rock and roll. Like there were a lot of drugs involved with all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people were dying, unfortunately.
Right.
It just wasn't talked about in the same way. It's the same thing with hip hop. There's a lot of drugs and a lot of drug references in hip hop.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get spoken about in that way either. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things where yes, there are a big majority of people who feel like they can't enjoy the music without drugs, and that's too bad. But there's a lot to dance music that is not just circled around that. And we know that. We know that.
Right.
But other people don't, I guess.
Well, I mean, how do you change that conversation? How do you change that perception?
I think it's about doing stuff like this, actually, which is why I was really excited to like find out that you're doing this and like telling stories.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but once you start talking to people, the people who make the music, the people who go to the shows, and you talk to them and you realize that like, oh, the people that go to these festivals and dress all crazy are actually like doctors and lawyers who just like need that kind of release and like want to do something really fun on the weekend.
And they're all people, right? I think
they're all people.
That's a great point, just talking to someone in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good point for kind of everything the U.S. is going through right now.
Exactly. And I mean, it's the same thing for artists. Like you never talk to an artist and they're like, oh, I just wanted to like fuck kids up and like make them like take drugs to my music. Like that's never anybody's story.
Right. Yeah, no.
Like I've talked to a lot of artists. You've talked to a lot of artists. Like that's nobody's story. And then you look at places like Europe where they do have like that history to hold on to and like understand that like that's why people really like this kind of stuff. It's not because of the drugs. That like happens on the side, but it also happens everywhere else. So.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point too. So I mean, I'll make an intro and all of this will have been said already, but I do want to say your position now is the digital editor for Mixmag. Am I right about that?
Yeah, it's actually changing. My new position, which will be announced very soon, probably by the time this goes out. It's the exclusive. I'm the global culture editor for Mixmag. So
that's an impressive title. Nice one.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm very excited about it.
Oh, that's really cool. And so actually that's even better for the question I was about to ask, which is talking about cultural differences between the scene here in the U.S., which, as we've talked about, there's a huge history to it. In fact, the roots of dance music are in the U.S., right? But dance music also has a very short memory, I think. And it cycles through listeners and audiences very quickly. So I think the current crop of people who are excited about dance music there's this young culture to it, right? It's a new feeling thing. Whereas you look at Europe and the UK, and there is a history there, right? And not more culture, but it's an older culture. And so for you and for what you do, be it reporting or the video content or the podcast or anything, is the aim to talk to people here, or is the aim to sort of shed a light on what's going on here and try to explain it to people elsewhere, or a little of both?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's a little of both. I feel like this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, I never undervalue the fact that early on in my career, I was one of the kind of like anomalies in the room a lot of the time.
What do you mean by that?
So I worked with a company called International Music Summit right after I graduated, which for those who don't know, they call it kind of like the TED Talks of dance music.
Right.
So it's a conference series. It was based in Ibiza. It's been around for 10 years now, so they've had it like kind of all around the world. And I remember at one point I was working with the conference, and I was like in this room. We had just launched a conference in China where dance music was so new. And I was standing in this room, and I was definitely the youngest person in the room. Probably, I think, one of the only girls. And I realized that like what I represent is what all of these people in this room who are super knowledgeable about dance music, have been around, like they're managers of like iconic names that you see like on the top of every bill of every festival. But they don't really understand like what I can bring to the table. They don't know my perspective, but they value that perspective, which is huge. And I will always appreciate them for doing that. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's like when Mixmag realized that they needed somebody on the grounds to be like, okay, the US, there's something really interesting going on there. We don't understand it, even though we know about like the extensive history of dance music across Europe and London. But we don't know what's going on over there. So we need somebody who can bring that to like our audience, but then also show like vice versa, the kids who were partying with me back in the day, who don't know about, who was hot in the 90s and like what acid house is and like
right.
what hacienda, like all that stuff. Like they don't know that stuff. So it's kind of a vice versa. It's to put people in the same room and be like, look, you guys have a lot in common, even though you might not realize it. Yeah,
well, and it's a very forward thinking. It sounds weird to say that, but I think it's actually forward thinking of an outlet like Mixmag to work with somebody like you in that capacity, because, and this goes back to, I think, a young versus old, sort of this culture war thing we've been talking about, where there are all these established media outlets for dance music, but I think, at least coming from the artist's perspective, the way you always think about them is that they kind of have this older perspective, and they're not always at the bleeding edge of what's happening, right?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it, what I always say is it can feel really...
I'm sorry, I don't want to put Mixmag in that category because I actually love Mixmag.
But I know what you mean in that like it can feel very inaccessible to a lot of younger artists or artists that don't fall in like a certain genre or something like that.
But then on the other hand, we were talking about the blog era, right? And that was the Wild West, and that was very much a youth movement, right?
Yes,
But now we're seeing this issue, and you don't have to agree with me on this, but I mean, even part of the reason why I started doing this podcast was I was sort of fed up with the really garbage level of discourse that was going on in dance music, mainly from the blogs, which I think blogs are not doing so hot right now in terms of everything, really. But I think there's a content issue where before they were sort of contributing to culture, and now they're just sort of leeching off of it to a certain extent. So I think you're occupying this kind of amazing space that hopefully we see more of, where it's the energy from the blog stuff, right? And being there at the forefront of the culture, but then combining it with sort of the polish and maybe the maturity of a more established outlet.
Yeah, I think that's a responsibility that, people at Mixmag long before I was there have taken really seriously, which has helped us kind of be where we are today, in that they recognize that we have the ability to talk to some artists that are out of reach for, maybe a small blog because they know the history of Mixmag, but we also kind of owe that same power to artists that feel like they can't reach us because they're like just getting started, but they've got a really cool sound and their story is worth telling. So to be able to kind of like do a little of both, because it was hard. It was hard for blogs because the media world changed, which is why the content changed so fast to kind of be a little less exciting, I think, for readers and artists and everything. They were just trying to like feed into like, what are people clicking on?
Well, it became a little bit more about the money, I think.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Which that's a whole different conversation.
The money
the media
fucked up
world.
a lot of stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Everything in media is crazy right now. But yeah. So I think that I've always really appreciated, like, from what I've learned about the history of Mixmag and the people who were running the magazine like so early on. They've always taken it really seriously to be like, we need to put people on the cover or do stories on people that it'll be like their first big break because it can be that for them. Like a Mixmag cover really can be like, oh my God, that was the moment when everyone realized like this person was going to be big. And then in 5 years, we're like, yeah, we were the first people, which is always also a really cool feeling.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Have you been involved with stories like that?
Yeah. I don't want to take any credit for what like the magazine team does because they're like an entirely separate team. But I think that, we were one of the first people to pick up on Peggy Gou as an artist who was like a really exciting person. And look at her now. She is like, has like the top track of last year and just is like this huge phenomenon in her own way. And then just on my own personal end, I know that we're working on this really cool series that I love. It's called Magnified, where our team hand-selected 10 artists that we're just really big fans of. And they're artists that are small. Like I would still call them small in a very respectable way, but to give them the opportunity, like we are bringing them into the lab and they get to play their own lab. And we did these really amazing mini like documentary features on them, which is so rare for an artist, because, video content's expensive and it's hard to do. So like a lot of places always reserve them for like the big stories or the big names.
Right.
But to like talk to a lot of these people and they're like, this is my first video interview ever. And to be able to like find out like, oh, you came all the way from here and like you've gone through all this already and you're still just only at the beginning is a really cool new perspective. I hope that people like
Yeah,
appreciate.
absolutely. I think, it's great you're doing that in general because I think that's going to contribute to the culture and keep it moving forwards.
Yeah.
Like we should celebrate our legends, but if that's all we do, then we're just kind of retreading the same things.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's interesting. Because I think every story, like the story of somebody struggling starting off, I think is just as valid as the story of somebody who got over that hump. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting too, talking about the video stuff, because I know you've started producing a lot of video content these days. You were the host of the Coachella live stream as well, right?
Yes.
Which is all video stuff. How is the transition for you moving into video and kind of new media stuff coming from, more of a writerly background?
I think it was a lot easier for me, to be honest, than it was for some people out there.
Yeah.
Like we were saying before, media changed so fast. Like even the past 5 years, you look back and things were just entirely different. But because I kind of came up in this untraditional way of learning about the world of media and writing, like I learned from people that I worked with on a blog. Like I wasn't in the same room as these people. We were over email, over GChat, and like that's how I learned, which I think some people, a more traditionalist person would look at it and be like, oh, like you didn't really like learn like journalistic ethic and all this stuff.
Which is probably to your benefit, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it has really worked out in that like I've been lucky to be part of brands, companies that really want to just try stuff. Like, Mixmag didn't have a podcast before and we were like, well, like, let's try it. And we just picked up microphones and did like a test run and we were like, I think this is okay. and it worked. And it's like really fun to do stuff. And same thing, like I've never had any training of like how to be on camera to like host and interview people. Like you and I were just talking about earlier about all the little like things that you do when you're interviewing artists. Like you're worried about looking at your phone notes, thinking like they might think that you're like checking
Not
your
paying
Instagram or
attention.
something.
Yeah, exactly.
But like that's all stuff that we learned just by doing it, you know?
Right.
And so it was the same thing. So that was definitely a highlight and very
How did the
appreciated.
Coachella thing come about?
So there's this wonderful guy named Raymond Roker, who works at Coachella with the AEG team. And he actually started his own magazine called Urb, URB.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's crazy you say
So-
that because I was thinking about Urb as I was driving over here.
Really?
Yeah, because I was thinking about how Mixmag is still going strong and how a lot of other things
Yeah.
aren't.
Yes.
And when I was coming up, Urb was like the
Yeah.
I
the one,
got
yeah.
I got like an article in Urb about some of my early stuff, and it was like,
You're like,
you know,
I've made it.
yeah,
I'm good.
no, literally. I bought
Yeah.
like 10 coffee, is the
Yeah.
whole thing. And now Herb doesn't exist. And no one even, a new kid doesn't know what Herb is.
Exactly. Yeah. So those who know, so he started Urb many years ago, and has worked his way up and is working with the Coachella and AEG team. And so he actually reached out to me on Twitter, and I was like, "Who is this random person?" And I did some like LinkedIn searching, and I was like, "Oh, he's like a real person. He's not like some random creepo who wants like a reel." And like I was like,
Equally
I had no idea.
possible, yeah.
Yeah. No, so, and talking to Raymond, it's really great to like see how something as monstrous as Coachella can value something like that. Cause he came from DIY grassroots, like I'm just going to make this magazine because I love house music and I love this scene. And he still has that knowledge, even though Coachella's lineups are like so current and like
Right.
everything they're doing is so different than like what that was. But yeah, so he reached out to me on Twitter. We had a great meeting and he was like, I just found you based on my knowledge of what Mixmag is. And it seems like you could be a really good fit for what we're trying to do. They essentially built out a new team along with Jason Bentley, who's done it for several years now. A new team of people who kind of knew their stuff about every genre. So like we had Nadeska, who works at Complex. She was all hip hop. And a girl named Brittany, who was just like this wealth of knowledge about live and rock music. So it was so fun to be a part of that team, to kind of also like learn from people about other genres.
Sure.
Because sometimes I get so like, oh, like I do know a lot about dance music, but I don't know anything about other genres. And to have like those conversations with like young women who also knew their shit about it was really, really cool.
Yeah, and to realize that it's all kind of happening in parallel to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that you're a part of a bigger thing. Those are cool moments.
And to hear other perspectives, like Brittany and I, she was like the, live rock music girl. We had a really funny and lively and pleasant debate about the, where rock music has gone in Coachella, and now
Right.
it's taken over by electronic music. So that was a really fun like conversation. I like really, really enjoyed that chat with her. I was like, okay, good. Like this is the person I need to talk to about this.
Yeah, let's get into this.
Yeah.
And I saw a few of those clips of the interviews and the hosting you were doing at Coachella. How was it different for you? Because, a lot of those were sort of these shorter, like 5-minute chunks, talking to an artist, then throwing to, some performance, that kind of thing. How did that feel? Was it different? Was it enjoyable to kind of, or how did you change your approach when, you just have like a couple minutes to talk to somebody versus an hour-long podcast or a, multi-page article?
Definitely. It's very high pressure. I'll say that, because we're kind of like, they kind of tell you exactly how much time you have right before you have it. And you're like,
man.
oh, okay, 3 minutes. Okay, what can I talk about in 3 minutes? But I was also really lucky in that the artists that I talked to this time around, because of the work that I've been doing for the past 5-6 years, a lot of them I have met before and have interviewed them at different points in their careers. So to kind of have that chance to talk to them at Coachella, which I think a lot of people take as like this huge, like big, important moment in their career, and they're just like happy and thankful to be there. That helped a lot. Like, for example, Troy Boy, I remember I had interviewed him maybe like when he had just moved to the US and was like, just people were starting to be like, oh, this guy's really cool. He's making like a really interesting sound. And then just like a year or two later to be talking to him at Coachella where he's like bringing out all these live dancers and like has this whole show. I was like, this is cool. Like to be able to like, you trust me and that like, I know your story.
Right.
So I know what highlights to like pull out right now. That was like a really, really cool way that it worked out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what you just described, that relationship is one of the things that those the more established media outlets can provide, right?
Yeah.
Is there's that trust, ideally there's that trust between a journalist and an artist that can evolve over years of, or over whole careers sometimes, that you don't always see with the more and I just keep shitting on blogs, but like, with the more clickbaity, just kind of like of the moment gossip stuff that's sort of here and gone, and you look at it and then you never think about it again.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. I love those kind of relationships. I love thinking about how you can marry sort of the old way of doing things with the new culture.
Because, it just always comes down to the fact that I know a lot of people are like really jaded about music and music industry, but the two rules of like you're an artist and you write about music or music culture, those are the two rules. Like you're really in it just because you love it. Like you're not in it because you're going to get a guarantee of it, like you're get paid out like a ton of money or like you're going to get all this fame or anything. But
and it's really the same shit, right? Like it's like for what you do, in the same way, I'm just making this up as I'm talking, but for what you do, I have to imagine, you had to find your own voice.
Yeah.
You had to, in the same way an artist does, like it's all the same thing in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like you're known for a certain perspective. You're known for a certain style.
Yeah.
And in the exact same way an artist would be.
Yeah. There's a lot of, and that's what I think my favorite parts of my job are, to find the stories that are worth telling. Whether it's, you just find an artist no one's ever heard about, or you have known an artist for a long time and you remember like there's this one story that really like shaped them to be who they are, and I can like help them tell that story and show people like, whoa, there's this whole other side to that person. So
how do you find those stories?
I don't know. I think it's just, just being true to just wanting to be a positive part of the culture and like that person's story. Like honestly.
So just your natural love of what you're doing kind of attracts those.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Because again, it's kind of that thing where I never got official traditional like training of like, this is how you find a story, like this is how like what sticks. It was just more of like, you realize that's what people want to learn about. Like people don't want the like PR blurb from the artist that they're talking about like their new album. They want to talk about like that weird moment where they like met some person in the, like, this is a real story also, found a person in the middle of a jungle who was like playing on this like Japanese instrument, and they were like, oh my God, this sound is amazing. Like, how can I, and they like had to go hunt and find that exact instrument, and there's only like 10 of them in the world or something like that. Yeah. Like, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, I can't believe that happened to somebody, but like that happened to somebody. And like, that's why they made their album that way or whatever.
Right.
So like, that's cool.
Yeah. And is part of the interest for you sharing those things too? Like for me, I was a DJ first, long before I was a producer. And even as a kid, before I was a DJ, I was just always like trying to make other people listen to things I thought were cool.
Yeah.
And that's still kind of probably what drives a lot of what I do.
It's like, listen to it.
Yeah, basically, like I think this is really cool, and for some reason you'd also need to think that.
Yeah. I think it's just it's so cool to see how it connects people. I think I realized that a lot when I worked with IMS, because I went to China and Singapore and Ibiza and got to meet all these people who have that same excitement that people have when they first uncover dance music, even though they've been in their respective industries for however long.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, the IMS period, because was that your first, out of college sort of first like major official gig working in media?
Basically.
Because you won a contest first, is that right?
Yeah, there was a contest. So a friend of mine had passed along this contest that IMS launched that year that I graduated. It's called the Visionaries Contest. And essentially, it was pretty forward thinking of them in that they wanted to open up a door to young people in the industry, because they kind of looked around and they recognized like, oh, a lot of our people that are involved are a little bit older. You know, they're the guys that have been around in music for a long time. But we want to make it more accessible to people who are like my age, who are just graduating and really interested in getting into music. And the premise of the contest was to find an idea to help either fix a problem or improve the music industry and present it. And it was really great because I had been doing that research about, you know, the drug laws in the US and how it relates to dance music. So I was like, this is a great way to kind of just get into that. So I ended up entering into the competition and winning, which was really great because the prize was to actually speak at one of the conferences, and they had one in LA that year. But then, this is like a long story, so you'll have to bear with me.
No, this is a podcast. Go for it.
Yeah. So I had this like incredible billing. I think I was supposed to speak like right after Cascade or something like that, and right before Quincy Jones.
Ooh,
which
prime spot.
I have no idea why they decided like that was my spot, but I very much appreciate that. But anyway, so all this like stuff happened. Like there was a technical difficulty, and then Quincy Jones arrived early, and they were like, we really can't make Quincy Jones wait. And I was like, that's totally fair because it's Quincy Jones. So I was like, okay, like I'll bow out. And I actually ended up not being able to speak at that conference, which at the time I was like, no, like it just ruined my whole life. Yeah. Like I missed out on this amazing opportunity. But then Ben Turner, who is one of the co-founders of IMS, was like really upset to hear that had happened. And we ended up having a meeting because he was like, oh, like maybe we'll get you out to the next conference or something. And by the end of that, he was like, you know what? I think actually the conference could really use just like a younger perspective. Like I'd really like for you to start working on my team. So that was straight out of college. I was like, all right, I'm going to do this and help them launch IMS in China, which was really helpful because I speak Chinese. And then did a couple rounds with them. But it was kind of funny because while that was happening, I just graduated and my parents were like, well, you got to pay the bills now. And I was like, okay. And IMS was great, but it was definitely more of like a part-time thing because it was like per conference. So I actually also signed on for a different full-time job while I was doing the IMS stuff.
Nice.
I worked with Snoop Dogg's management to help them launch a site called Mary Jane.
Yes, I was really hoping this would come up.
Yeah, it always does. I like, there's no reason to not talk about it. So I helped them launch Mary Jane, which is a website, kind of like a lifestyle website that's all about weed.
Right.
Which is kind of funny because like I'm just not like a crazy weed person.
Sure.
Like I'm totally fine with it, but like I just have never been that kind of person. Like I know all the strains and like know everything that happens. So that was a really interesting like first jump into real life because I was like in the daytime I'd be helping them just launch from like a very like technical aspect of like, here's how to build a backend. Let me find you writers. Let me get you off the ground.
Okay, so you were kind of doing everything for them.
Yeah. It was, the website was not existent before I got there, which was very exciting because I was like, I really helped them build it from top to bottom.
Did you know how to do all that?
Yeah.
From school?
Yeah, from working with Dancing Astronauts.
Right,
It all like, it
course.
was so full circle. It was a really strange way of how it worked out.
Did you get to spend much time with Snoop? Did you?
He came in for several like big meetings, and he's honestly, I have nothing bad to say about him. He's a friendly, super nice guy, was smoking like crazy throughout the whole conference meeting, but he just like, he had all these really insightful points to bring up because he just like really understands audiences and what people are looking for and what people like.
Yeah.
So that was, it was great. It was like being in the room with the genius. And I was like,
well,
cool.
no, I mean, I was about to say, I actually think he is kind of a genius.
Oh, totally, yeah.
He's reinvented himself so many times and can appeal to kind of anyone at any age at this point.
He's like a meme, but like one that you take seriously at the same time, which is like very hard, I think, to be like.
And he's managed to find this space where just sort of everyone loves him.
Yeah.
Like he's just this lovable presence no matter how you perceive him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a very, very interesting character and obviously like amazing talent.
Yeah.
But I was like working with their team as my day job and didn't really tell them that I was also working at this conference at the same time, which hopefully they won't listen to this and never find that out. But yeah, so I would be kind of like leaving for a week at a time, being like, I've got an emergency. I really have to go.
And they're like, so many emergencies with this one.
Yeah, it was really, I don't know how I got away with it, but I'd be like in China, like awake at like 4 a.m., like sending an email out to them being like, I'm not in China. It was a very strange time in my life. But it was really exciting to be able to like figure out what I loved and what I didn't like. Because I think by the end of like a couple months, I realized that I really loved working with IMS and I just like couldn't let it go. But also I was like burning myself out pretty quick. Right. So it all was like somehow everything worked out kind of moment where Ben from IMS heard my like cries for help essentially. He was like, oh, I've actually heard that Mixmag is looking for somebody like an editorial person in LA, like let's figure out a way to make that work. So that's how I actually got connected. So it was all just being in the right place at the right time.
Of course.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, it's like that old saying of like, I'm going to butcher this, but it's something about, you're the luckiest when you're working the hardest.
Yeah.
Because it's really like, sure, right time, right place, but also you were doing what you wanted to do and trying really hard, burning the candle at both ends, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
To me, that's when those moments always happen, right?
Yeah.
It's not when you're sort of just sitting around and like get lucky with it.
Yeah.
Well, I have to imagine too, as somebody who you've said you're very interested in culture and dance music culture, must have been fascinating working in other countries, right?
Yeah.
And especially in Asia, which, China still right now is crazy for dance music. How was that experience, seeing it through a different lens? What did you learn about sort of how they process dance music versus how we in the States do?
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of my favorite things about learning it or working at IMS was how much I learned about the different cultures and why they react to dance music in the ways that they do. China specifically, as you mentioned, I have been going to China since I was a kid, like every single year to visit family and just re-up on my Chinese language.
Right.
And so it was a really interesting experience to go to China for the first time as a work trip and then, talk to people who have been working in the country trying to build up dance music culture there and like, creating these festivals. So that was a really interesting thing because it comes down to just every single part of culture affects like the way that they receive this kind of music. For example, obviously people know that China is quite restricted. You can't go online freely in the same way that you can here, Facebook, Instagram, it's all blocked. And at the time, I didn't actually even know that SoundCloud was also blocked. YouTube, all blocked in China. So
that's going to be such a different experience just at a base level.
Yeah. So that was the craziest thing is realizing like that people weren't hearing from people in China simply because we were just living on different digital planets. There were all these kids who were like, oh, yeah, I've been trying to learn how to produce, but like I can't look up a YouTube tutorial. I can't go on Facebook and like message my favorite DJ. And I've also got my tracks uploaded, but no one hears them except for people in China. And like that, like if you just think about it for a little bit, is like so mind blowing that you're like, oh my God, like
it's insane.
How have we gotten here?
It's insane.
Yeah. So to like be in the same room and then also like realize the way that they appreciate like when an artist like comes to their country. Like I remember that year that I was there, like Skrillex was headlining a festival and just like to see the way that those kids react to Skrillex because he's literally never there and they have no access to him besides like maybe at this point he has like a WeChat profile set up, but I doubt it's quite as updated as his regular Instagram is,
And in that way, I mean, I guess even the biggest artists probably still felt underground, right?
Yeah. And just the way of like what's happening in China's underground, like it's crazy to think about that. Like, what are we missing out on? That's
I was
happening
about
over
to.
there?
Do you know? I mean, that's such an interesting question to me because in the States, there are plenty of dance music stars from overseas, but not a ton from China that have broken over here.
Yeah,
you know?
Really none at all. And I honestly don't feel qualified enough to talk about like what could be going on. But it's just, I mean, even just thinking about the possibilities is really exciting. And then I remember another like important experience from that conference was I met a bunch of people who had come over from India to that conference to just kind of meet people and be in the same room, and realizing that like India has apparently, they've got like hundreds and hundreds of dialects.
Right.
And you know, like two Indian people could be standing next to each other and not be able to like speak to each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the way that dance music apparently like brings people together in that crazy way, because they don't have to be disconnected because of language. Like just little things like that. Like it sounds really cheesy, but it makes you think and be like, okay, like there is like a very important reason why we're all coming together and having like a music conference to talk about it.
Right.
I think sometimes it feels a little like, oh, like is this just like a ego pat each other on the back kind of thing?
Yeah,
you know,
just
but
sort
like,
of like a masturbatory work so great.
yeah, but it's
thing,
like if you really dig in and like let those people come to you and like tell you their stories, like that's really cool.
It's so interesting to me the way other cultures perceive what's going on here.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I think we all know at this point in the last 10 years, like dance music in the States has just gone crazy. There's this big explosion. I mean, it's the reason we're all here, probably still here doing it.
Yeah.
But, you know, you go overseas, like I think from my perspective, playing shows over there, and it's perceived so differently, right? And if you saw it on film with the sound off, it would kind of look the same. But then when you're actually there, you realize that a lot of these experiences, like I think about in China, you know, there's these crazy bottle service clubs, right? With this insane over-the-top production and all that. But then there can be this kind of mismatched energy where you can show up and it's sort of like you don't really know what they expect from you. Yeah. Like it almost becomes more about the spectacle.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and then it literally goes all the way back to what we started this conversation saying about everyone is looking to take something away. Like everyone's looking to take something different away from the music. And even if it's the same music and the same artist, just because of like the way that person has experienced culture and life and been exposed to all of that. Like it's very interesting. I've learned a lot about the world through music.
Has it been like a corridor to travel? I mean, you said you had been to China a lot as a child, but has music opened up like other places you might not have gone?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I grew up with a big kind of inherent love with travel because my mom is a professor and she travels a lot for her work. And as a kid, luckily, she always took me along and kind of like let me see the world early on. Yeah, super valuable. And so I guess like, places that I've traveled to with music have been a lot. So, I mean, I went to all over Europe, been to like Ibiza and Amsterdam, and a lot in like Central America to Costa Rica to Colombia for like a day, a lot in Mexico, which has been really interesting to learn about Mexico through music for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, but again, I think the U.S. scene is maybe a little ignorant or blind to, because it is popping off.
Yeah, Mexico. Yeah, I mean, I've had a very interesting experience with Mexico. The first time I was there, I was at BPM Festival.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, when there was a shooting at a nightclub, and we were at the nightclub when it happened.
My God.
Yeah, so
what was that like?
Frightening.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, were you close to it? Was it? I mean, is this like running for your life kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird to like think about it. I never really like think about it very often, but
we don't have to talk about it.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think people should know that kind of stuff happens, just like the current climate of what's going on.
Sure.
But yeah, we had just it was the very last day. My friends and I had been at BPM Festival for a really long time. The festival was like 10 days long, I'm pretty sure.
God.
So we had been there for all 10 days for some reason.
Yeah.
And I kind of went into going to Mexico with like the typical stereotypes, I think, where you're like, ooh, it's going to be a little unsafe. Like, I have to be really careful. And it had been like a whole week of nothing going wrong. Like, no one, like, the worst thing that happened was like one of our friends got swindled by a taxi for like to pay like double the price. And we're like, great.
Yeah,
like,
sounds about right.
Yeah, let's go home with that as our worst story. So we were all going to like Blue Parrot for the very last party. And we walked in, and thankfully we were in the backstage area, and we had like just gotten there. Maybe like 10 minutes later, we heard like gunshots, which I think you kind of really never know. You just like can't prepare for a moment like that. Like, I think when we heard it, we were like, wait, is that really happening? You know, like, is that really what's going on? Like, is it fireworks? Like, is it not? But I remember at the time when it happened, it must have been right after another mass shooting somewhere else. I think it was like very fresh in people's minds. So people started like running right away, and we were like hiding in an area and just kind of like waiting to figure out like what was going on. It probably was like only for a couple minutes. But yeah, you just can't really like prepare for a moment like that, really. But we thankfully all got out okay. And like, I mean, if you don't know what happened, it was pretty terrible. Several people died. Like, the security guards died. There were some tourists that died as well. And I know friends who were also at the club who were in different parts of the club or had like really, really, really scary experiences where like they almost like got caught in a stampede like they saw things that were like pretty horrific. So yeah, I mean, I just feel really lucky that we got out okay and it was fine.
Yeah. So. And that's such I mean, words kind of fail me in a way because it's so senseless, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't, before and after this thing has happened and it's significant and it requires processing, but I don't know what you do with that,
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, I remember after it happened, that was my first time in Mexico, and it was, like, you would think that I'd be like, oh my God, I never want to go there again, like, terrible place, which, like, I may never go to, like, Playa del Carmen again, just because it's, like, a little frightening to think about going back there.
Of course.
But I went back to Mexico like twice afterwards to like different cities, and I really had a lot of appreciation for people who had like known about what happened, and they were like so eager to be like, it's not this way.
Right.
We have so much appreciation for this music, and we're like the people who put on these festivals have a strong love for it. And yeah, I think, it's definitely something unfortunate that has to be said. Like, people should be like aware that stuff like that happens.
Well, and certainly, it happens plenty in the States.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely one thing, like, you kind of take for granted, like, when you go to a club or you go out, you're just like, oh, I'm just here to have fun. Like, I don't need to think about anything. But like, you kind of always have this moment of like, okay, like, I'm going to look around and like, do I feel safe here? Like, am I comfy here?
Well, and that's just the smart move, right?
Yeah,
it's one of those things where, it's like that old meme of like, you can't let the terrorists win, if we stop enjoying ourselves, blah, 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 which is true. And for me, like, I think about that kind of thing. And I'm lucky in that I have not been through that kind of experience, but I'd like to think that even if I did, I would still be doing the same things I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's smart. It's a weird time, man. This is. I was just talking to Getter, and he was saying he literally. I guess this, like, he has a thing about shooting, like mass shootings, and it's like it weighs on him. And he was saying he plays shows in Kevlar vests now, and that's just like how he
that's
mentally deals, right? And that's an extreme version of it, but I think it's worth saying. It is affecting the way people are conducting themselves on all sides of it.
Yeah, it definitely, like, it breaks my heart, like, thinking about like the news that's happened like over the past however many years. Every time, especially when it's like about like music or like about a nightclub, I'm just like, whew, like, those could be people I know, like that could be me. But yeah, I'm happy to say that like I still go out very often, and like still, I'm not like terribly affected by it. I definitely, like, it's in the back of my mind, but it's like, it's cheesy, but like you like what you like, and it's like you feel safe when you go out to these shows. You like feel really happy, so you're just gonna keep doing it.
Well, and that's absolutely, man. And especially for dance music, that's why we're all here, right? Like, I think, going out because you feel happy and because the music, it's an escape in a way, right? We've touched on the roots of dance music a bunch of times. That's how it all started, right? It was like, it comes from communities of either minority or underprivileged or the LGBTQ community, all of that. That's where it all started. And it was an escape, right? It was where, people in those communities could go, be happy, escape, whatever terrible shit was happening at the time. And I mean, I think it's still, for me, it still is that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I don't know. I maybe that's a good way to start wrapping it up, but...
I mean, I honestly could talk about just music stuff like this forever.
Well, I could too. Well, maybe that's one more thing to mention is... talking about sort of the roots of dance music, and you were talking about how you've kind of done the homework after the fact, right? Like you got into it and then started learning about all these connections.
Yeah.
And one issue I have with the dance scene, particularly in the US, is that it does have a very short memory and that it often does not know its own history.
Yeah.
Right? And especially as it pertains to minorities and as it pertains to underprivileged groups of people who were the originators of this music. It was their music. And now that it's blown up into the mainstream, there's a certain element of, white people doing what white people do and just being like, oh, yeah, that's great. I'll take that.
Yeah, it happens.
I mean, so on your side of it, from the journalistic side, how do you thread that needle of shining the light on either the originators or the roots of it, or the people who aren't getting the shine that maybe they should be, versus the popular stuff, versus, what people just have this hunger to consume?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just comes down to respect, I guess. I mean, it's been kind of like a theme of what we've been talking about this whole time of like, if I go to a kid who thinks techno people are all snobs, and I'm like, hey, I appreciate what you like. And I'd love to learn about it and learn about why you are such a fan of it. I hope that person would feel the same way about the other end. They'll go and be like, all right, fine. I've never really understood techno, but at least I'll try it out and learn about who Jeff Mills is, or learn about who the Belleville 3 are, and really figure out is this important to me? And if it's not, that's cool. That's cool, whatever. If you're not into it, that's fine. Because there's also that element of those, there are people who it's always going to be a little underground. And it's fine. It's not for everyone, which is kind of the cool part about it. You feel like you're a part of something really special. Yeah, and I think that's just kind of, at least it's worked for me thus far, to just kind of approach things that way. Even music that I don't listen to in my personal spare time, I, talk to a lot of artists that make that kind of music and respect where they come from and how far they've had to trudge along to get there. So
yeah. Well, and I guess I agree with that, and I think that's a healthy attitude.
Yeah.
I guess the point I keep thinking about, it bothers me, even in doing this podcast, I've had trouble not making this the white dudes talking show. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I know what you mean.
Yeah. And it's both in terms of race and in terms of gender. I feel like it's a strong issue in dance music.
Yeah.
Probably in all of music, but I feel like specifically dance music has it kind of bad.
Yeah.
Even before, when you were talking about that you felt like you were the anomaly in the room as a young woman in this group of older dudes. Is that something you've experienced in your own career, as far as have some things been harder, or have people not taken you as seriously? Yeah,
I think I've definitely experienced my fair share of it. I'm thankful that it hasn't affected me in a terribly negative way, because I feel like I've gotten to where I want to be. Actually, thanks to the support of a lot of older guys who have seen the value of being all right, I would like to bring this person in because I value, I know that they're younger, but also are willing to learn and can bring a lot of things to the table. And I'll never not appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, it happens to all women. It's you'll be the only one in the room, and a guy will come around and shake everybody's hand except for yours. And you're like, it's fine. I work here for this conference that you are attending, but it's fine. Yeah. And they find out later and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I didn't say hello. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, you didn't seem sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it just comes down to, like this conversation that we've had over the past year about, paying attention to women in music has been really important. I think it definitely got to the point where I think a lot of women were like, I'm tired of talking about this.
Absolutely.
Which is also really important to acknowledge and like respect. And don't like single out, be like, she's my favorite female DJ when you're like, why
worst,
are they
man.
not just your favorite DJ?
The
like
worst.
they can be just a regular DJ too.
All those cringy, like, all-female lineup.
Yeah. And it's like, I understand there was a good intention there potentially, but just to even just keep it in your mind, like when you look at whatever project you're working on and you look at a lineup and you're like, whoa, it's a lot of white dudes, like no one else. It's cool. Like you still should pick someone who deserves it. Like don't pick someone just because they're a woman or a minority or whatever. But I mean, we've recognized that like throughout all of our time at Mixmag, like a lot of the work that we do, naturally, thankfully, it's just included women and people who are minorities. But it is important, like when we look at something and we're like, okay, like we really have to make an effort to like, if we don't know of someone who fits into this mold, like let's dig because like someone's out there.
Right.
And just to take that extra effort.
Yeah,
is really
absolutely.
cool.
And just to follow that logic of, because there will always be those, I'll just call them assholes, who will make the opposite argument of, it's just merit-based, the best person for the best job. But if you follow that logic line and you say, okay, there's like an all-white dude festival, and if you actually think that only white dudes have that merit, then you just think that white dudes are better? And like I'm not going to follow that all the way down, but we kind of know where that goes.
No, 100%.
Like that's a dangerous road, man.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is, it all relates, right? It's like you go see these places, other places in the world, and you're like, whoa, like that person deserves my attention. I just, for some reason, have never seen them before because they just haven't been like the typical place that I look. And that it applied like in China. I don't look in China for like SoundCloud DJs because they're not on there, but there are probably many of them that are really awesome. It's the same thing for women. It's like, I think now it's very encouraging to see how many people are really getting into it, whether it's like you work behind the scenes or you're an artist or you're a writer or whatever. Like I've seen a lot of women who have been like, I'm stepping up to the plate and I'm going to be here whether you like it or not.
Does
cool.
the media side have, I'm sure it does, but does it strongly have those issues as well, as far as a lot of it being white dude focused? Because I see it more from the artist side, where I definitely notice the issue.
Yeah.
But I've never really thought about if it's the same thing on the media side.
I would say, probably as much as like any other industry, there is like a level of it. But I think that from what I've noticed, at least, there's less of it in the sense that I think a good media outlet respects different perspectives and different ways that people tell stories. And the number one way to do that is to find people who are just different. Like you get a different story when you are younger than that writer, or you grew up in a different place than that writer, or if you look different than that writer. Like, I think you just naturally will get a different story because you're looking at things differently and people talk to you about different things. So I think less in that way, but as is every industry, it's always kind of there. Yeah.
Of course. And I think that's a good note just for anyone who thinks about getting into this industry, right? Is that your perspective and what you bring to the table is more valuable than almost anything else, right? And your specific experiences.
Yeah, no one has that but you, so.
Yeah. How much of what you do for your work is something that's pitched to you versus something that you personally just say, I want to write a story about this? And what do you look for when it is pitched to you? Like, what catches your eye? Yeah,
I think definitely at this point in my career, it's a lot less of like what's pitched to me versus like, okay, I found that really interesting and we're just going to go for it. And that's not to say that PR isn't important, because there's a lot of value in having somebody on your side who's working really hard on the PR side. But yeah, I think I just realized a long time ago that people are looking for stuff like this, like they want to hear the kind of off-guard perspective of like an artist or a story or whatever it is. They don't need like the same clickbait, copy-paste post that has been fed out to a lot of people already.
Right.
And it takes a lot more work to do stuff like that, as I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the value is always so much higher. You know, like you always get a lot more people who are like when somebody comes out of something that you created, wrote, recorded, whatever, and they're like, wow, I really like never thought about it that way. Or like, that's new to me. That's like, oh, I've done it. I'm like, that's it. I'm good. I don't need anything else but that. Or if they're like angry about it, if they don't agree with it, but they're like thinking about it differently, you're like, cool. I don't agree with you, but like at least you're thinking about it differently. Like that's awesome too. So
yeah, and it's a human connection again, right? Yeah. I think that's so valuable. Well, I'll wrap this up. The only other thing I wanted to ask is this whole time while you were talking, I've been thinking about the questions I ask a lot of artists on this show. And one thing we end up covering a lot is sort of musical influences and that sort of thing. But I'm curious if on your end, were there writers who influenced you along the way or other outlets? Like, any big ones that really affected the way you thought about what you did or changed the way you thought about what you did?
Yeah.
Or even just people in your life.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of really impressive music writers, but I think as you finished that question, you said other people in your life. And it kind of always comes down to, I mentioned before that like my mom traveled a lot when she was, when I was young and she took me with her. And my mom actually is a professor of criminal justice.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of wild. And her research specialization is in human trafficking, which is kind of crazy when you start thinking about it. And I grew up with that, like a early exposure, I think, to that kind of subject early on. I think which obviously it's a pretty dark and terrible subject, but it helps you think about the world in a different way when you learn about stuff like that exists early on in your life. And yeah, so I think that really helped me put a strong value on like, okay, there are so many stories that are like underneath the surface.
Sure. And there's a big difference between, reading an article about something versus digging into it yourself, right? And starting to tell the story from your perspective.
Yeah. Like hearing the stories that she's like learned about from interviewing people and just being in the same room as people who are like spending their whole lives learning about this kind of subject. I obviously don't do research on a very similar subject, but I recognize that I have that same interest in learning about like, why does the music affect people this way? Or like, why is this all happening because of that? And I think that interest for me came from like her for sure.
That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. Shout out to mom.
Shout out mom. Moms are great.
Moms are great.
I want to talk about just what you're doing right now. I want to make sure we mention all the stuff people should go check out. Obviously, you have the On Rotation podcast, which I feel a strong kinship with you about that because I think we're kind of the only two people making stuff like that, as far as I know. There are some other. I don't want to. There are some
others, but
I don't want to shit
many.
on anybody. But in terms of like, it's a podcast.
Yeah, about dance music.
Yeah, right.
We're holding it down.
Yeah, and it's you and another host.
Yeah, Harrison is the other host. And it's Mixmag's podcast, and we kind of approach it every week where we talk about just things that are going on that we cover on the website, but then also kind of perspective from us, just being two people who are also really different. He's like total New Yorker, like Brooklynite. Yeah. And like is a DJ. He like is such a music head, and I respect him so much for that. And then I come from a very different perspective of like growing up on the West Coast. And so we have like a really fun banter, I think, about all the things that happen. And then we talk about like new music and always interview an artist. So it's really cool.
And you're also making a lot of video content as well, right? That's almost, to me, I know it's all sort of part of the Mixmag job, but to me that almost feels like this separate show, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's definitely a treat. Like Mixmag has really pushed hard on like creating more like original, cool stuff. Like we've been working on, like I said, this Magnified series that I'm really proud of is our most recent one. So go check that out if you're listening.
Yeah, really cool. Are all of those out now?
They're still rolling out as we speak, but probably by like the end of February, they'll all be out.
Awesome.
So it's just like a really cool series that shines light on some artists that hopefully you have heard of some of them and maybe haven't heard of others. But they're all kind of like worth your time, which I think is a really important thing.
Absolutely.
Like just watch it, learn about them. They're all cool kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's literally my favorite thing. Yeah. It's like that new energy. That's I think what keeps me here. Is there anything else you want to talk about that people should be looking out for? Anything you're working on? anything that your new role that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about, my new role at Mixmag is just going to be a lot of like what I'm already doing, but then also taking us into like just places that we haven't been before. Like you don't realize until you start being told that like dance music is everywhere. Like it's in fashion, it's in film, it's all over the place. So hopefully you'll be seeing a lot more from that. Besides that, it's kind of funny. Like I'm not an artist. I'm like, what am I promoting right now?
I mean, yeah, it's totally fine. There doesn't need to be a lot. I mean, I think with what you do, you're always working, you know?
Yeah, there's definitely like projects that I hope to bring to life, I think in the next year or so. And I just hope that people realize, you know, like being a journalist is kind of like a funny thing nowadays because it's like, I hope that people appreciate my perspective and like want to hear more of like the things that I've learned and the things that I'm observing. So I appreciate you if you're following along in the journey and there's more to come.
Well, what is it that keeps you here? What's exciting to you right now? What's still fun about what you do? You know, what's the most fun part for you?
I mean, there's just like never not something that I don't know. Like I just can't know everything.
So it's the discovery.
Yeah, like I'm always learning about new artists or like new parties and new festivals or whatever it may be. So there's just never not something that I'm uncovering. And so like I just hope that I can do my part in showing other people that.
Well, I love that.
Cool stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad you're here doing it. This has been really fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to end with the same question I ask at the end of all of these. Just a moment in your life, and it could be recently or it could be from when you were a kid, when in a moment, music really deeply affected you. And that could mean change the way you thought about something. It could mean was connected to an important moment in your life.
Yeah.
Gave you goosebumps. Just kind of the first thing that pops into your head.
Yeah. Well, I actually knew you were going to ask this question already because I've listened to your podcast.
God damn it.
But I mean, I genuinely, I thought about it, not for too long because I was like, okay, it should be like one of those, what?
No, I love by the way, you're the only guest I've ever had who asked me how they should prepare for this. Literally the only one that's ever asked.
I'm like, the interviewer gets interviewed.
Oh,
like,
no,
it
made me so happy, but then it made me question my own preparation because I didn't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I like the way that it flows.
No, this has been great.
Yeah, so I think the moment that I just can never forget, which I now think holds a lot more weight as I get older and realize that, you know, like when you grow up with parents who they're not necessarily like music first kind of people, I think when they do kind of show you something that they get really excited about, it sticks with you forever. And I remember my dad, he was driving me around at some point when I was probably like a young teen and like so in like typical dweeby dad fashion, he's like, I've got this like really cool CD that I'm really excited about. Like, let's listen to it. And I was like, okay. And he pops it in and it's Paul Simon's Graceland.
Nice.
Which is like just classic, you know, but like it was like new to him at the time. And like I just remember we were listening to like You Can Call Me Al. And like I had like the CD booklet out and I was like reading the lyrics and I was like, I wonder what this all means. Like what is he talking about? And we were just like having such a good time like listening to it because it's just like such feel good like happy music. And just like such an innocent, like, I don't know, like what any of this music's about or anything. But it's really cool.
I love that though. To me, that just makes me think of a theme that's been running through this whole conversation, which is just the connection that music can bring to people, right?
Yeah.
Like it brings you and your dad together. You share this experience.
Yeah.
Later on, you think about that music and remember it fondly because you had this moment.
Totally. And like he's from a country that doesn't speak the same language, but is like jamming out to Paul Simon. That's awesome.
Another layer too.
Yeah. So like, that moment's really fun for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, this was great. Thanks again.
Yeah.
You feel
Thank
good?
you so much. I feel great. It was really fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Peace. All right, that's the show. Shout out to Valerie. That was so much fun. I had a great time sitting down with you. I really do hope we get to do that again sometime. Make sure to check out all of her projects, the On Rotation podcast, all of her work with Mixmag. The link to that is in the description of this episode. My name is Willie Joy. I hope everybody out there enjoyed that as much as I did. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Let me know if I can help. You can always hit me up, backtobackpod@gmail.com or at Willie Joy or at backtobackpod on all social media. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know who you want to hear from, what artists you'd like to see. Anything you want to chat about, really. I'm around, so just holler at me. That's it for this week. That's it for January. God damn, that went fast. 2019, we're off and running. I hope everyone out there has a great week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday. For Back to Back, this is Willie Joy. Peace.